Drama builds over the president-elect's high-profile cabinet picks. What do the latest appointments reveal about his administration? Will Democrats attempt to block the nominees? Trump continues to bypass the media with his tweets. Is this the new normal on how the president will communicate with the public? Trump makes waves on the international stage while the list of potential names for Secretary of State continues to expand. How will his approach impact decades of diplomatic protocol? And will any other Utahns be tapped to help lead the country? In Utah, results are finalized in several razor-thin races. Legislative leadership has been selected with significant changes. What do these and other committee assignments reveal about the upcoming legislative session? And what will be the hottest issues lawmakers will face? Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, Jessica Priest, assistant professor of political science at Brigham Young University. Representative Brian King, minority leader for the Utah House of Representatives, and Doug Foxley, managing partner at Foxley and Pignanelli. We're so glad to have you all with us today. We'll start with a continuing conversation. We still don't have a Secretary of State, and we keep talking about it, and the list keeps changing of potential names. Doug, let's start with you.
Well, first of all, Jason, we haven't had a Secretary of State for the last 8 years. I mean, so the bar is set really, really low. When you had Hillary, give money to my husband Bill, and I'll do whatever you want me to do, Clinton, or John Kerry. So, I mean, we probably could go without having a Secretary of State. But as to your real question, is who will the Secretary of State be? Look, nobody in their right mind thinks that Donald Trump will pick Mitt Romney. But you know what? The whole discussion about Mitt Romney, it's brilliant. And I'm not talking about the payback time. Look, when you really think about it, is everybody talks about Donald Trump and the stupid things that he appears to say. But who says more stupid things than Donald Trump? Mitt Romney. I mean, here's a guy, Mr. 47%. I mean, he goes and offends the Brits and the English and during the Winter Olympics. I mean, Mitt Romney, if by chance he were chosen, he would make Donald Trump look good.
Representative King, what do you think?
Talk about bomb throwing. I mean, how am I supposed to follow that from Doug? No, here's the thing. I think that when Mitt said what he said so straightforwardly, and in a way I found commendable back in March, called him out for Donald Trump for what he was. I think that was a positive thing, but I think it destroyed any chances that he has of working with this administration. I mean, if for no other reason than this, even if Trump were comfortable with Mitt, which I don't think is a given, the base is completely suspicious of Mitt. So I don't see any way that he's going to be called as the Secretary of State.
What do you think, Jessica?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely. I think Donald Trump, more than even caring very much about ideology, cares a lot about loyalty and cares a lot about who's on his side and who supports him. And Mitt Romney was a vocal opponent of him, and that's gonna hurt Mitt Romney's chances of convincing Donald Trump.
Do you think he knows that? Is this not a risk Mitt Romney knows?
Well, I think what Mitt Romney is doing is he's being willing to put himself out there for mocking and for ultimately being defeated in this battle of Celebrity Apprentice, right? But I think he thinks that he could be good for the job, and I think he's willing to put his name through all of that on the offhand that he can sort of save America from some buffoon remark, right? So.
Okay. Well, so it sounds like none of you really think that it's going to be Mitt Romney.
I can't see it being. Jessica used the term defeated. Humiliated is what
That's
Donald
what-
Trump
that's
did.
what this would be?
Humiliated is what Donald
That's a
Trump
better
did
word.
to Mitt Romney. And I think it's sad. I feel badly for Mitt Romney because I think he showed some real courage politically in coming out earlier this year and telling it like it was about Donald Trump. But I just don't see that he's going to be able to get through that gauntlet.
Well, and I also think it's a decent and courageous thing to do, to be willing to let all of this circus happen because you feel like you might have something to offer for the country. And I think I think Mitt Romney is very smart. I think he knows exactly what's going on.
Well, I think he wants to be of public service.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Okay, well,
if Mitt Romney were really smart, he would have stayed in Hawaii. I mean, look, there was no way that he was going to be named Secretary of State. I mean, you can put, you can put lipstick on the pig here if you want, but really, call it what it really is.
He would be a great choice as Secretary of State. For that matter, John Huntsman would be a great choice.
Well, let's talk about
as
John
Secretary of
Huntsman
State.
for a second, because that name has emerged, right? And he has great international experience. He's on this list again. What are you?
I think he'd be great. I think it's an interesting, from our position as Utahns, it's interesting to see once again this sort of conflict that exists between Romney and Huntsman that existed in the 2012 presidential election too. But I think that, that Huntsman is sort of a dark horse. He's someone that hasn't been involved in the mix too much, but you're not going to find many people that have the credibility in an international stage, and more importantly, have the experience with China, which is the key player, I think, going forward into the future on an international stage.
Well, it came up just this week, didn't it? When the call came from the president of Taiwan to President-elect Trump. Takes the call.
I mean,
Come on,
you
Jessica,
gotta be careful, right? I mean, the issue of Taiwan is a deeply sensitive issue to China. I mean, they not only the government of China, but the people of China care a lot about the issue of Taiwan. And if you're gonna change our long-standing one China policy, then that's your prerogative, right? But you should do it in an orderly and measured manner. And just sort of making some phone calls is dangerous. It's not just, it can be dangerous.
I totally disagree. Look, what was this election about? This election was people wanted change. Okay,
Fine,
and
do it in a way
if
that's
you
not
want to go
gonna
through the
blow us
typical,
up.
if you want to go through the typical business as usual stuff, but look, you had Ronald Reagan, a great president. Ronald Reagan, doing his radio interview, kind of talked about, potentially bombing the Soviet Union. Guess what? They capitulated. Donald Trump was brilliant in what he did. He put China on notice, like, hey, don't take me for granted. I think it was a brilliant move. And, you guys can go through all of this bureaucratic Secretary of State stuff, but occasionally you have to get somebody out there who's going to make a difference. And I think he put the world on notice, and I think he put the international community on notice that, hey, guess what? Don't take me for granted.
Yeah, but here's the problem, Doug. He's got 4 years now to live with this. And if you start off on such a hostile note where you poison the well, basically, before you even get started, I worry about that. And look, I don't have confidence in the ability of Donald Trump to act as a diplomat with finesse and with sensitivity. Nuance is not his deal. It never has been.
Well, then
international relationships is where you got to have some nuance.
Then you did not watch his victory speech on election night.
I tried, and I certainly did not.
You should have.
But it's the
because
first speech that he's
it was
presented
nuanced
any finesse.
and it was diplomatic.
Okay.
It was not bad.
And here is a person who basically said that he was going to jail Hillary Clinton. All of a sudden now gives her a pass. This guy.
Why are we giving the guy credit for giving her a pass after he's threatened to jail her? What we should be doing is condemning him because he threatened to jail her. That's completely out of line.
Well, you and I could have a great discussion about that one there, but I don't know if Jason wants to go there today.
We're going to have to get back to that one another time. But let's talk about how John Huntsman Jr. might kind of soften those edges right there. He already had some great comments about Taiwan and that relationship with China as well. Is this the kind of person that Donald Trump needs as the Secretary of State? And how do you handicap this one? Is he really on the short list?
John Huntsman Jr. would be a phenomenal Secretary of State. I mean, that's what he was born and bred to do. I mean, not only does he have the appropriate resume, he has the appropriate intellect, the temperament. He would be amazing. And the thing of it is guess what? Donald Trump was an outsider, okay? He defeated the GOP establishment. John Huntsman Jr. is an outsider. He wanted to defeat the GOP establishment. But the other thing you haven't taken into consideration here is there is a Wharton connection here. I mean, now everybody talks about the good old Harvard, good old boy connection here, but Mr. John Huntsman Sr., one of my heroes in life, has been chairman of the Wharton School of Business. As he refers to him, Don has been on his board, went to Wharton. There is a great connection here. I think there is a chance that this could really happen. This one is real.
Jessica, how do you compare the chances right there against some of these other names, Petraeus or Giuliani?
I mean, I think it's kind of anybody's guess. My understanding is that what's going on right now within the circle of the Trump transition team is that there are different camps. And so I think partly this will be trying to find out which camp ends up winning. But I think, I think China, I think Huntsman could be a wise choice on this. And I think China, they're going to watch and see what the administration does. And the signal of Huntsman, I think, could be a signal that would help them put into context the telephone call in Taiwan.
So that is so interesting. So just kind of the final question on this here too is, if you look at the range of possibilities from John Huntsman Jr. to Mitt Romney, Giuliani, is there any consistent theme in these potential names for Donald Trump? It seems like it's so varied.
Well, I think that if you look at who he's called to other positions within the cabinet, it gives me great reason for concern and worry personally that he's calling people who, A, have connections with the kind of community that he's lived his whole life in, namely the upper 0.01%. But B, that they're not the best qualified people for the job, not at all. That's why I'm skeptical that John Huntsman, even though I do think he's the best qualified man for the job, he's not going to get it. It'll go to somebody else with whom Donald Trump has this greater personal connection for some reason or another.
Can we get to this point a little bit about some of these cabinet positions already? Sometimes you hear in the political world, we're going to run this place like a business. All right, what we need is business people who can kind of just approach the bottom line. Can you run government like a business? Doug, you've seen it for a very long time. Can you?
Well, obviously there are differences, and and Washington has its ways of basically killing off people, and the bureaucracy has ways of waiting people out. But that being said, look, what happened is our current president, he basically decided that he was going to avoid people who had any really real world experience. And I think, I take exception to, my good friend, my representative. And by the way, I voted for you. It was basically a Soviet-style, election. There was only one candidate, So I mean, by the way, undecided always starts strong but fades in the end. But anyway. But no, I think we'll be pleasantly surprised by the people. Look, the 16 people who are running for president, Donald Trump was my 16th choice. Okay, I mean, the only person that would have been worse was Lion Ted or televangelist Ted. So Ted Cruz. But look, I have been pleasantly surprised about not only who he has considered but who he has appointed. And I think, the problem is with all due respect to my respected and venerated representative, but you are just going into this like it's Trump. Anything that Trump does, Trump bad. Well, guess what? Trump might actually be good. And I welcome the chance to be with you 4 years from now. And when all of a sudden things are going along swimmingly.
Representative, it feels like you're going to have a moment on that.
I got to tell you, there's just. I think that there are so many reasons, Doug, to believe that Donald Trump has got us off on the wrong track. And you ask about government versus business. Here's the reality. They are out to accomplish fundamentally different things. I mean, government is there to provide services where the private enterprise is inefficient or does not, for whatever reason, want to provide those services. They can't do it efficiently. So there's an important role for government to play. You don't want government run in all facets just like a business. There are aspects of running a business efficiently that are important that you bring into play for a government, but you can't just bring more business people in and expect that it's going to go well.
Well, let's talk. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think I agree with Representative King that there are differences and we need to pay attention to those. But one similarity is that you want people that know what they're doing and are familiar with the things that they're trying to run. And some of his picks have familiarity with the area and some don't. And I think, for example, nominating Ben Carson to run Housing and Urban Development, he's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing in the operating room, but has no experience with that particular area. And so that's concerning, is that why would you do that?
Mm-hmm. What about people like Scott Pruitt? That was a very interesting pick for EPA, the same position that Governor Leavitt left to take.
Well, Scott Pruitt's an example of why in the world do you want to put people in government who don't believe in the fundamental mission of the agency that they're asked to lead, or in government generally, and that's Scott Pruitt with the EPA. The guy doesn't believe in protecting the environment in a way that most reasonable people would look at and say, yeah, let's do this.
Oh, Brian, come on, give us a break. I mean, what you've had is you've basically had a Congress who has not been willing to go along with our current president, Barack Obama. And so really through basically executive fiat, he has stymied a whole bunch of things. He's tried to grow the bureaucracy. You've got somebody there who's going to say, wait a minute, let's put the brakes on. So, I am sorry, but, if people don't buy into, your view or the Democratic view of like, this is the world and this is where we are on climate change or whatever the case may be, then they are inherently evil and they're inherently incompetent.
I don't think they're inherently evil, Doug. I think they're just wrong.
Okay. I want to get to some of this regulation piece we discussed, Jessica, for just a second. So in this last week, Donald Trump goes to Indiana, helps broker a deal with Carrier to keep some jobs inside the United States and in Indiana. Is this a positive kind of development from the President of the United States?
I think the thing that it's the closest related to is a protection racket, right? I mean, it's very concerning that a president would be specifically singling out, businesses and sort of, hey, if you're good, we'll, and keep your jobs here, then we'll give you these big breaks. And I just think it's not sustainable. Now, and I believe that on both sides of the aisle, right? So,
So the big breaks are one thing, but let's talk, because there's carrot and stick here, right? So the carrots are the tax incentives.
Right.
What do you think happened in that call? What were the sticks that he threw out there?
I don't know. Right? I mean, that's the problem, is
like
we don't
tariffs,
know.
for example. Is that one of the things he's going out there saying? Hey, you can move, but guess what? Coming back is going to be
give
tough.
credit to the guy for rolling up his sleeves and doing something that nobody else has been willing to do. And you can be very cavalier about this, but guess what? There are 2,000 people in Indiana who still have jobs, okay? And so, I think that which you are saying, Jessica, it's just vintage Hillary Clinton. You have no regard for really what people are doing.
No,
I suggest you read Hillbilly Elegy, and you basically figure out.
It's a wonderful book, and I think that there are many important things, but I think that we have to be careful, because what it ends up doing is it sets up incentives for other companies to threaten to leave just so that they can get the tax breaks. And then if a state runs out of money to give those tax breaks, then the jobs are gone, right? And so I think that it's just not the right way to do it. I think you need to do it in a systematic way, systematically approach how do we care for the people who are really struggling in this economy. And I don't think tweeting about it and doing it one-on-one is the right way to do that.
But see, that is the typical bureaucratic, let's do business as usual, which isn't working.
No, look, what we're seeing with Donald Trump, Doug, is personality-based leadership. And we do have to have...
And we didn't have that with Barack Obama?
We did have it to a certain degree, but Barack Obama also recognized the importance of process and the importance of a method that was systematic.
But see, so the process was basically going around Congress and just going through executive fiat, doing whatever he wanted to do, because Congress wouldn't do it?
You set up an even playing field. You don't engage in crony capitalism. What you've got with Donald Trump is the beginnings, and you're going to see this, mark my words, over the next 4 years in abundance. Crony capitalism, where the people who are most closely connected with Donald Trump personally are the ones who get the spoils. He's picking winners and losers.
But unlike with the Clintons, guess what though? He is not benefiting, okay?
Oh my gosh! Doug, I'm sorry.
We don't even know. We have no idea if he's benefiting or not. We have no idea what his financial entanglements are.
So we're going to have to get to some very local things here in just a minute. But maybe the transition to that is this. Maybe, Representative, while you're on that point, if Donald Trump said, I Am Flash is leaving the state of Utah, all right, and he wants to come in and save it for us, how is that received? As a legislator, how is that received?
Well, I think it depends on what he wants to do. Does he want to put in place a process, a system to keep not just I Am Flash, but to attract those kinds of businesses to the state of Utah? the kind of Silicon Slopes of businesses that we want, I'd love that. Would love that. There's a process that you can do it through, and not have it just be crony capitalism where you happen to know the leader of the country, or you happen to know the governor of the state, and through that personal relationship get an advantage over other companies that may be doing their job just as efficiently or even more efficiently than you, but they don't have that advantage.
So let's have a bureaucracy to do everything.
No, you don't have a bureaucracy.
It's a process.
When you use the word bureaucracy, Doug, you're just slandering all of the government processes that we believe in. Do you like how your fire services are delivered, or your police, or your water, or your sewer? I do. It's efficient. It's not a bureaucracy. It works.
But guess what, though? All of a sudden, you've had such dereliction in what has been going on that sometimes, before you can get the processes in place, you have to do things that are out of the ordinary. And look, I'm not a Donald Trump apologist, but give the guy credit for actually, being willing to roll up his sleeves and do something different.
Okay, we're going to have to leave that one for a second. The governor, state of Utah, Governor Herbert, released his budget this week. $16.1 billion is what he has allocated and built his budget around. High emphasis on public safety and on corrections, in particular, the highway patrol, and then public ed. You had a chance to look through this budget a little bit, Jessica. How do you feel about those two big priorities for Governor Herbert?
Well, I think they're in keeping with what a lot of Utahns care a lot about, and so in that sense, I think that it's consistent and not terribly surprising.
Is there any way to get enough funding out of this budget for public ed, Representative?
Well, we're way behind in our spending on public ed, and I wouldn't be so much troubled by that, except that I think our performance has suffered over the last 20 years quite a bit with both our public ed and our higher ed students. And so I'm concerned that we can't get to where we need to be. The goals of Prosperity 2020, the goals of Education First, some of the nonprofit groups and business community parties who want to come together and make sure that we do a better job with public ed. I worry that we can't do it without additional funding. I know the governor says we want to grow our way into it, but with additional growth within the state and the economy of the state, you see additional pressing needs for public ed. So I just don't, I appreciate the governor's efforts, and I want to go in the direction that he wants to go in, but I don't know that they're enough.
Doug, will the legislature be there with him on this? I mean, do they really worry too much about the governor's budget?
Well, I mean, historically, the governor used to present his budget. The budgets were presented in committees, and then all of a sudden, there came a time where the governor's budgets were not actually presented in the legislative committees, and the legislature kind of decided they would go do what they were going to do. And so, but that being said, I think the governor came forward with a great budget. I think that he basically recognized the two compelling needs and give credit for doing what he did in public safety, and basically also saying we need to change some things there. I think that the legislature, after all is said and done, will pretty much go along with what he's proposed. Will they basically put their signature on some things and kind of massage some things differently. And by the way, I respect this man right here. Okay, I mean
you're saying this because I'm your representative.
my esteemed representative. I mean, he gets up every day and goes to the Capitol and just forgoes this extremely lucrative law practice, and he is really good at what he does. Okay, I refer people to him. Okay, but the poor guy. I mean, he and his caucus. I mean, they are just so meaningless in all of this. So,
okay.
I mean, talk about passive aggressive.
Yeah, so it sounded like that was going to be nice for just a minute.
Yeah, I thought he was coming.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But the fact that you're willing to do it,
no. Listen.
But you are a voice. You are a voice that needs to be listened to. Okay.
Well, we are a super minority, and people say you're the minority leader. You must be something special. I say I resent that. I'm the super minority leader.
You are
true.
indeed.
But here's the reality on stuff that is really. I mean, if the Republicans are united on something, they can do whatever they want. That's true in any supermajority body. It's true in the Utah State Legislature. Here's the reality. There are a lot of issues, important issues to the state of Utah in which the Republican caucus is fractured. And the difference between passing something and not passing something depends on the Democrats. And in that sense, on some very high profile and some very critical issues, we are of central relevance.
That's true. So I had to get to a couple things.
And I will actually say here to that one. Okay.
Okay. You got that one there, Representative.
Thanks.
So I have one more thing, and then we got to talk about what the governor has done just this last week with Amazon, which is interesting. But a couple interesting changes in leadership, Jessica. First of all, after so many years, Lyle Hilliard, Cash Cache Valley is stepping down as the executive appropriations chair, which no one really thought would happen. How is that going to change the dynamic in our legislature? Maybe you start and then representative, because you're going to be someone who will have to deal with that.
I mean, I have no idea. I guess we'll have to wait and see and find out.
Well, Jerry Stevenson.
Yeah, Jerry's a great guy.
I think that's likely to be what happens.
Yeah, that's. I think that one of the things that this showed when they put Lyle over as the co-chair of the Public Education Appropriations Subcommittee, which he now is, that was an indication of the priority that's being given to education issues by our Senate leadership, and I appreciate that. I think that Lyle will do great work as a co-chair of the Public Appropriations Subcommittee, and the recommendations from that committee will funnel up to Executive Appropriations Committee, which he previously chaired, which I serve on, and we will make some decisions based on those Public Education Appropriations Subcommittee recommendations.
Okay, very good. We have about a minute. We have to talk about this deal that Governor Herbert has struck with Amazon, collecting sales tax for all those online sales. What are Utahns thinking about that?
I think a lot of Utahns are going to be sad about it.
But guess what? A big wow. And kudos to, look, people have not been paying sales tax on
Explain
items.
that for a second, because that's law already.
Yeah.
It's a law, but they have to voluntarily pay it and report it. They don't. And
Very
so there
few
is
people.
there has been an unequal playing field. I'm surprised Amazon did it, but guess what? It's where we need to go.
But apparently Amazon has done this with a number of other states. To their credit, Amazon's credit, and to the credit of the governor, I think I agree with you on this, Doug, that we ought to put in place. The law requires that citizens report use tax for out-of-state sales or online sales on their federal or on their state tax return, and we don't do it. And this will nudge us in the direction of doing it more. And I think that's a good thing because that's what the law requires.
Especially when you have the 800-pound gorilla.
Okay. We're going to have to leave it at that today. I can't wait to see how this rolls. Certainly it's more money for the tax rolls, right?
It's a good thing.
Very good. Thank you all so much for being on the program today.
Thank you.
That's it for today's show. Join us again next week for another edition of the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry. Good night.